Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Rosham Joe Paints. As always, my name is Joe and today I will be painting a Black Templars Primaris Neophyte. A little bit of flesh, bare head, some hair to do, some power armor, some leather, so, should be a good time. Except for the leather and the flesh, basically, and the hair. Other than that, good times. So, with that said, let's get into it. So as always, with any of my models, we are going to start with a primer, and in this case I used the Vallejo Black primer sprayed through an airbrush. I happen to have an airbrush, so it makes it simple. You can put on a pretty good coat without globbing up too many of the details. I've also used, Chaos Black primer, and the only one that I've used so far that I was not a big fan of was Army Painter. Because it just went on so thick. And it was probably user error. I'm sure plenty of people have good outcomes with that stuff. But in general, take your time, go slow. You can even brush it on if you want. Just make sure you're using a nice thin coat. And then once you are done with that, because it is a black in this case, or because I used a black, I'm going to follow that up by painting all of the power armor in Abaddon Black. And the reason that I do that is, again, just because I think I've said this in previous ones, simply because the Abaddon Black, which is what I will be using later to do touch-ups where I screwed anything up, is a different sheen or whatever. It's different overall than the Vallejo Black, and so I want to make sure I'm starting with a good spot. And the reason that I'm starting with this is simply because then I can be as messy as I feel like being, and I don't have to worry too much about hitting, like, oh no, I hit the tabard or the belt or anything like that. It's simply just go over the whole thing. In fact, if I was really smart, I would have just kept my airbrush out and used that. But I haven't had a good track record with thinning my paints for airbrushing, so I'm going to do it this way. Then once this is on, we can start putting on other base coats for everything else. So with Abaddon Black done, I'm actually going to start I'm going to switch over and do a little bit of Rakarth Flesh on all of the parts that are going to be skin tone. And that would be the head here, as well as the arms, and I'll show you the arms in a second. I think all of the Neophytes, they don't have anything covering basically their forearms, so it's going to be more of, they'll have shoulder pads, and then right out of that you got a little bit of flesh, and then they have gloves on. So just that one little small section on the arms, and I think that's it as far as all of the fleshy bits here. And the reason we're doing this now is because I can be messy with it, and any of the blacks we just painted, since we're not doing a shade on any of those, it doesn't really mess with it. You can touch it up really easy with Abaddon Black if needed be. So a couple thin coats of this, make sure you don't clog up any details, and there you go, starting to look like a person. And like I said, here you go, there's the arms again, just right outside the armor. And see, again, hit the armor, but that's not a problem because it's just Abaddon Black that we're touching up with. It's not like I've shaded that down with anything, and there's no blending to fix it later on. So just want to make sure, we want to make sure we don't miss things like that. You can see right here. There we go. And we're not gonna stop here. We're not gonna shade right after with this, because what I'd like to do, or what I'm going to try to do on this one to maybe make it easier on myself, is I'm going to put in the Rakarth Flesh, and then I'm going to go in with, what is it, Kislev Flesh? Yeah, Kislev Flesh will be next, and I'm going to go and layer that directly over the Rakarth Flesh, the Rakarth being the base that gets it off of the black color without 40 coats. And then we'll do a thin layer of Kislev, and then we'll shade, and then we'll layer with Kislev again, and then highlight with, what is this? Flayed One Flesh. So my hope is that we can get a much more natural look, because usually when I've done flesh in Rakarth Flesh and then done the Reikland FLeshshade directly over that and then try to highlight, it's just a super stark contrast. So we'll see what it comes out with. Like, again, I'm not that good at flesh. I'm just, testing it out here. We'll see where we get. So regardless, again, a couple thin coats. Make sure you got a decent coverage. It doesn't have to be, doesn't have to be super thick, or it can be a little bit translucent, just because we are going with that second layer. You're not shading directly on top of this one. So. With Rakarth Flesh dried, we're going to go over it with a layer of Kislev Flesh, and it's just again for all of these parts, doing a couple thin coats. This I find is I've thinned this paint down a little bit just to just so it doesn't clog up details. So it's going to probably take like 2 or 3 coats just to make sure I've gotten all of that that Rakarth Flesh covered up, and then after this we will shade. Once our Kislev Flesh is fully dried, we will then be able to add a kind of a, I would say, light layer of Reikland FLeshshade, and that is going to go over all these places that we just did. It's like that is just far too heavy, but we're going to smear it around. But all over the places that we just did Kislev Flesh. Obviously, that would be, again, the face that I'm doing right now, but as well as arms and whatnot. And you don't want this to pool too much in areas like the eyes, because I'm telling you not to do it, that's why. No, because it makes the painting the eyes a little bit harder later on. And you just want to make sure that it's not kind of like uneven in how it's doing. So I'm going to get my brush cleaned off, come back, and just kind of use it to, like, see how there's a big pool around the eye, so I'm just going to tap it in there, maybe push it, and yeah, there you go. So now you can see the lines defined a little bit better, and then I'm going to put it under the hair here, just so we have a little bit of shadow from where his giant bowl cut stops to where his skin would be. And I'm going to keep moving it around and not letting it settle, so that until I'm happy with how it looks. We also are going to do the arms, which I did in advance, in the tradition of having a something already completed that I can show you for this step. So here we go. Ta-da! Look at that. I actually really like the tone of the arms and how they came out. So yeah, so we're gonna let this dry fully. Some people say a half hour, some people say an hour. I say until I actually get a few minutes to actually paint again. So that'll be 3 days. So we'll see. Anyways, now that our Reikland FLeshshade is actually dried and I get to see what the definition looks like with the shade and like all of the cracks and crevices and whatnot, I think what I'm going to do is actually just leave it like that and not go back and try to change any of the layers or anything, because like Flesh doing this and that to the but yeah, so I don't think I'm going to go back and layer any of the fleshed. Can I help you? Selling myself short. That is true, you bring up a good point, but a counterpoint to that is it's really hard, and I don't necessarily feel like taking a ton of extra time to, you know how long it takes me to make these things? And look, don't look at me like that. If you're so interested, why don't you come over here and do it yourself? I'm not actually sure what that means, but your attempt at guilt tripping me into it isn't probably going to work here, because it's my decision overall, and it's not likely that I'm going to end up. Alright, so like I was saying, now that our Reikland FLeshshade is completely dry, there's 2 ways for us to go about adding the Kislev Flesh back on, and that's either going to be, like in this case, where I actually just took and layered back over in the higher areas, avoiding all of the creases where that Reikland FLeshshade has, gone into. And now for the face, I'm actually going to try something new that is, not actually new at all, but I'm going to try dry brushing the face, just going straight down and just trying to catch the raised portions. Of course, if this does not work, I will then go back and start all over on the face in general and probably do a layering approach. But my hope is that because the light, when it's hitting the face, is going to be coming down this way as well, I can drop my paintbrush. I can kind of just cheat, essentially, hopefully. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what it comes out. I'm just looking for, a little bit of, I do this, here's the thing. I do this on orcs or on other things, so why not people? I don't know. They're all just models that have it's the same idea, just different shades, right? So I'm hoping that this method will give me an easy out to trying to paint, and maybe it'll look good, and so long as it doesn't look bad, I'll consider that a win. So anyways, it is actually looking pretty decent. There's still under the cheekbones, there's still a little bit of darker area. Inside the ears, it's still dark. So yeah, I'm happy with that. Obviously, you can't do this type of method on like a head that you've already placed on the model because you'd be dry brushing all over it, but in this case, I don't know, I think it's going to work. So I'm going to finish up the other arm because I think I only actually layered one, and then we will come back and put a little bit of high edge highlights, and again, maybe even a lighter dry brush. We'll see. Yeah, that's good. So to finish off the flesh, we're going to be using some Flayed One Flesh, and again, I'm going to try this dry brushing method, but I'm going to focus mainly on the pointy bits, such as his nose and his eyebrows. I don't want to pale out the entire face, but just get enough so it looks like the raised parts are more raised, and the lower parts are not messed with, I guess, is what you would say. But in general, just, you know, you can always put more of this on later, but if you need to start over, you have to basically start over. Makes sense, right? So just go slow. I am happy with his face for now. I'm going to come back and try to paint the, what do we call your eyeballs? Oh, your eyeballs. There you go. Now for the arm, I'm again not going to put a whole lot of Flayed One Flesh here. I am simply going to try and highlight maybe the sharpest parts between the muscle groups here. Thin little lines. I don't want them to stand out. You know, it's not like I'm edge highlighting here to make his arms look like they're metal. I just want a little bit of definition, a little bit of added coloring variation, because, you know, skin tones change. They're all over the place. So that's the reasoning I'm telling myself if I don't like it. But, you know, that's what skin looks like. I can't do anything about it. So anyways, it looks really, really, really bright under the lighting. So apparently I have changed something recently. But in general, yeah, just adding a little bit of extra highlights just to help the definition, as if this dude needed any more definition in his arm. Moving on to the boots and the gloves now, I'm going to be painting those in Dryad Bark as a darker brown leather, and then later on we're going to do another leather, but that will be a lighter brown for like the belt, and that's going to be like a Mournfang Brown. But for now, I'm going to put on a base coat of Dryad Bark, 1, possibly 2, depending on the coverage, just making sure that I am extremely careful around that flesh so that I don't have to do any touch-ups, because it just never comes out right. So yeah, there you go. Just boots down here. Some of these pieces are going to have metallic on them later, like the Black Templars type of black with a little bit of blue highlighting or whatever it is. But for now, we're going to cover the entire boot section, and then once we do the actual armor, we'll go back and worry about touching up that black. So for now, I'm not going to be too concerned. Again, the main thing I want to avoid hitting is going to be the flesh in any areas that are close by. Dryad Bark dry, we are now going to switch over to painting some metallics, and the reason for that is because I'm going to be using Nuln Oil on the boots and the gloves to make it an even darker black. Black? No, it's brown. To make it even darker brown. Normally you could use Agrax, or you can. It's up to you. I'm not telling you how to paint. I'm telling you how I am painting it. But anyways, I'm going to use Nuln Oil to make these boots even darker and the gloves even darker. So I may as well paint all the metallics and anything else that's going to be shaded in Nuln Oil, so I can do that all in one step and then wait for 45 minutes for it to dry afterwards. So with that said, I've already painted. You can see the belt buckle here, nice and shiny. On the back, this is something I've done for all of the Primaris guys, and it is this little circle that's inside this larger circle. On the backpacks especially, I like to do just this whole this ring as if this is a separate piece of the backpack. I don't know. It's just how I do it. I don't even know what it is. I'm gonna have to do a lot of cleanup later, but you can kind of see where I'm going with this, or maybe you can't. I'll try to zoom in. That's out. Hey, there we go. Now you can almost see what I'm doing. Maybe I should have had it like this before. Anyways, basically this ring right here, I just like to make these silver, so it sticks up here a little bit, you know, go around, and then of course clean it up, this is how all of my Space Marines and Primaris anything have been done. Other than that, the main components or the main pieces where you're going to be putting the Leadbelcher is places like the entire chainsword here, because they need to be nice and metallic and pokey, as well as probably, I don't know, maybe some of this, maybe some of that. I don't exactly remember what I was planning, but like the motor that runs this will probably end up being white. And then his pistol over here, bolt or pistol, whatever it's called, the pieces on here that are metal as well. So not a whole lot of Leadbelcher going on. This breather tube or whatever this is, I'm going to do it metallic. You could also do it in like a gray, which kind of goes the same, at least for me. For these straps back here, I like doing these in a gray versus a metallic, but man, the world is your oyster. You want to paint it like an oyster? Paint it like an oyster. Anyways, I'm going to finish up the metallics, and then you'll kind of see where I'm going with that. And then after that, touch up the black, Nuln Oil. Alright, so we're done finishing up with the metallic spots, and then we went back and cleaned up a little bit with Abaddon Black on any of the parts that were supposed to be black. And I had gotten so excited to be done with the flesh that I think I skipped past the fact that I have to paint both shoulder pads white. So I've done one already. You can see what it kind of looks like. This is going to be Celestra Grey. It's a good base coat. We want to make sure it's nice and thin though, because whites, for some reason, at least with, I think it's like the white, yellow, any of the lighter colors, if you try to put on, they tend to streak for me. So I'm just using a very, very light coat and trying to be as clean as possible. But again, we can always clean up later with that Abaddon Black on these crosses or whatever they're called that are on the shoulder pads here. And again, be careful around the flesh so that you're not hitting those lovely little bits here. And then once this is done, I think it's just the handle grip here, and then we can do an overall with the Nuln Oil. But first, let us do the rest of this Ulthuan. Nope, Celestra Grey. Ulthuan is just second layer, and I'm just not sure why I wanted to say that. And also, in this next step, we're going to use that Screamer Pink on the handle, and then remember us in the dark gray, so we're going to put a little Eshin Grey right here on these straps, and you'll never see it, but you know, I'll know it's there, so I want to make sure that I do it for myself, you know, just to make myself feel good. So. Alright, so we're going to look to a couple things in this step here, or this section here, and one is to put the Eshin Grey on these straps back here. Like I said before, you can do these in Leadbelcher. Well, I don't know if I said that before, but in general, you can do these in Leadbelcher if you like, but I choose to do that in Eshin Grey. Also, oops, there you go. The reason that I'm doing them in Eshin Grey and not just leaving them in Abaddon Black and then highlighting in Eshin Grey is because I'm lazy. And after I do this base coat of Eshin Grey and then put a little bit of Nuln Oil on it, the Nuln Oil just rests in there and leaves the, you'll see. It basically means I don't have to come back for it, and since it's such a tiny little, I mean, I wouldn't say insignificant part, but since it's just a detail that you may not end up noticing in general, normally with like the larger backpacks that stick out more, it's kind of like a less noticeable. This guy might be more noticeable. I don't know. We're going to find out when I'm done. Anyways, so that is that part of the step, and wash my brush off here. And now we are going to use some Screamer Pink, and this is only going to be applied in one little spot here, and that is, there we go, onto the weapon handle, just for the sword, and you know, in between the fingers here. Since we haven't done any shading yet of the glove, you can don't have to worry as much about hitting that glove, because you can always just come back and tidy up again with a little bit of that Dryad Bark. But for now, we are going to finish that part off, and all we need to do now is let it dry, come back, and you know, we're gonna do the boots and the weapon, metallic parts, and the parts that we just painted now. We're going to do all that in a little bit of Nuln Oil shade, and then from there we get to keep doing other parts, and then we'll put some more shade on it, and then we'll get to a point where we're basically done, and then we'll highlight a bunch of it and take a, you know, another, I don't know, 45 minutes. It won't be 45 minutes. I think the whole video is probably going to be like long. Anyways, let it dry, Nuln Oil, then we'll move on. As you can see, I've thrown a little bit of Nuln Oil on just about all the stuff. We got the glove, we got this the pistol, all covered in that. The straps back here, the metallic bits there. Gonna go over this carefully because again, we got his face there. We don't want to end up having to redo all that flesh. No one wants that or the bad acting that was involved in it again. So we're gonna safely and slowly, cautiously, however you want to say it, go over these Leadbelcher bits. We're not going to do any of the Celestra Grey simply because there's really no cracks or crevices for it to get into, so there's no point in putting Nuln Oil on that to just paint over it again. Don't forget the belts here. Really, there's only a couple cracks and crevices there, and then we are going to go and obviously get the chainsword here. So yeah, anywhere you think is going to look good with a little bit of black shading, you can use it. Once again, I'm using the Nuln Oil instead of Agrax Earthshade for the leather bits, at least for these ones, because I want them to come out a little bit darker than the other belts are going to be when they're shaded with the Agrax Earthshade. So next up, we're going to be using some Mephiston Red to do on the gun and the chainsword here. Real quick, just for the eagle-eyed viewers, you may have noticed that his hair is now painted in a brown and his head is actually on the body. For the hair, just use any 3 paints that you feel like using that you think might look good on for his hair. I think it was the Dryad Bark, and then a little bit of Gorthor Brown and a little bit of Baneblade Brown, maybe. I don't even remember. Might have been Zandri Dust for all I remember. Just to make little lines in his hair. I don't know if you can see them, but yeah, it's good enough. And then I also went in and did a little bit of Abaddon Black, or rather Ulthuan Grey for just the eyes, and then followed that up with a little tiny dot of Abaddon Black. And then I used some Flayed One Flesh again to just go over the top, the very, like up here. You see how my eyes, when they're closed, you still see a little bit of this eyebrow here, or eyelash covering. Eyelid. There we go, eyelid. You see my eyelids, hopefully. If not, you're going to get something that looks like, which I've painted those before too, and they look very serious and very angry, or like they've seen something that you shouldn't have. And I'm sure I'll put up another thing again because I thought it was hilarious the first time I did it. Anyways, in this step, we're going to go over and do some Mephiston Red, and that is going to be right schmear. That is, as you can see, far too thin. I watered that down way too much, so what I'm going to do is leave it alone, move on to the next section, but then also give it a very long time to dry, and then I'm going to come back with a little less watered down Mephiston Red and cover that. I mean, you can get the general idea, but yeah, it's almost like a shade or a glaze consistency right now. So I may as well use that on the gun a little bit too. But the bot, it's just the case of the pistol, which is going to be roughly like that. I'm going to leave for whatever reason. When you look at pictures of these, some people paint the grip or whatever, I don't even know what they want to call it. So I'm gonna call it a grip. So they paint the grip in the same color as the gun or the casing. I like leaving it black for some reason. I almost at one point wanted to do them in brown as if they were old like shotgun handles or something like that. But I just like to have a little bit of variance, just cause. So that, I think, is it for the Mephiston Red. And like I said, just coming back with a couple coats, make sure it's nice and solid, and then move on. All right, carrying on, we've got Mournfang Brown now, and I've almost painted just about all of them, and it's going to be any of the belts or pouches we're going to do in this, what I'll refer to as the lighter leather color. And as you can see, a couple mistakes here and there, but on the black portions of the armor, you can just clean that up really easy, but do be careful around the flesh, obviously, and any places where we've already added shade, because then it gets into a little trickier area as far as cleaning up goes. But these panels that are black, if you're painting next to them, just clean them up after you're done. You can actually maybe see, that's why I wanted the dark brown, the dark leather, as I was going to call it. I've already cleaned up, put a little black here on the back pan, the piece that's going around the heel, around the top, back at the calf, front of the shin, and also this little ankle piece. Wow, that was some anatomy lessons for you right there. So look at that. You see how I paint stuff, and you get some random facts that I hope you would already know about, but if not, there you go. So I'm gonna finish this up, brush up on the rest of my chemistry and physics and all the other high school sciences that I haven't taken in a while, and move on to something else. Next step up, and I think the possibly last one before we add a little bit of Agrax Earthshade, is to paint the cloth tabard that is draped in front of him. And again, we're going to be as careful as we can, but it's not the end of the world, because most of what this particular one is up against is stuff that we can clean up easy enough, other than these boots right here. I want to be careful around them. Now, there are a couple of different ways to do these kinds of cloth. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to come back with a shade of Agrax Earthshade, but for the most part that's just going to be in the extreme deep recesses. What I'm then going to do is clean up with some Zandri Dust, which is, by the way, what I'm using. I don't know if I said that yet. I'm going to do some Zandri Dust, and then some Ushabti Bone, and then back, basically going back and forth, because I don't want extremely hard lines when I'm doing cloth. I want them to almost be like a soft transition. Now I want that, whether I can pull it off is another thing, but you can simply do the, paint it in one color, do a shade, that color being, again, Zandri Dust, do a shade, and then just, do some edge highlighting as well, which will look just fine. It's just I've gotten into a habit of making it harder for myself, and I think the more I do that, the better I will be at all kinds of stuff like, energy weapon blending, because you're essentially just blending the paints together. So it's a nice big spot to test and practice with. Anyways, a couple thin coats of this. I am not probably going to bother trying to get in between there, because pretty sure I will just end up messing it up, the legs and whatnot, but I can see some bits sticking out here. And so we'll do that. There you go. And then of course there's also this part that is tucked up right under this chest piece and above the belt. So finish that off, and then we will have what looks to be a basically done model. My thumb just will not stop cracking. I'm going to go through and add a little bit of Agrax Earthshade to all of the leather pouches, leather belts, the bolter, the chainsword, and of course this tabard up front, and a little bit back there as well. So all in all, we're just going to add Agrax Earthshade, and then put it down, let it sit there, let it dry, don't touch it, leave it alone, etc., etc. Come back when we're ready, do some Retributor Armor. Alright, the last base coat that we're going to apply is some Retributor Armor, and that is going to be on the gold portions. One being the pommel of the sword here. We're going to cover this skull in some gold, and watch out for the handle itself, which we did in Screamer Pink and Nuln Oil already, so don't want to have to do that again, just because I'm lazy. Not for any other reason. It's actually probably one of the easier portions to clean back up. Second part being the Aquila that is on the chest here. And again, we did some Nuln Oil across these Leadbelcher portions, so just be careful there. But again, it's not the end of the world if you have to clean it up. The one thing I would try to do, or the one thing I do try to do, is when I'm painting these, just make sure that the lines stay nice and defined, because the Retributor Armor actually feels it acts like a much thicker base than other ones. So my camera just turned off. Why would it do that? All right, so I'm just going to continue using this other camera. Hopefully it's still working. Yeah, there you go. Technical difficulties, but this part is not technically difficult. I'll be here all week. So as I said, I came back and finished up with a little bit of Reikland FLeshshade in here. I'm going to drop that down onto the black just a little bit, just so that it's up and under the the gold so that you don't have a really bright gold on the very bottom, and in between here just to make sure. So kind of all over the place, and then we'll come back and highlight that later. Also, there was the pommel down here on the end of the chainsword, and with that, we're basically tabletop ready. We are, what do they call it, battle ready or whatever, in a much slower time than you could do if you had other paints, but that's fine because I enjoy painting. So I'm gonna let it dry, and then we will start to highlight, and I have no idea what I'm gonna start highlighting with or layering with or doing whatever the next step with. So you'll be as surprised as I am once you see the next section coming. Beginning of the highlights, we're going to actually go with Mournfang Brown, so we're just going to be highlighting the leather we painted just a little bit ago. Now, you might be able to tell, hopefully we'll be able to tell, that I already did the belt up front here. I got to do this last little loop, or not loop, this little, no, the end of the belt, I guess, real carefully. And I'm using the Mournfang Brown as an edge highlight here, and trying my best to just stay on the very edge without hitting anything else. And we'll see how I do. Pretty good, I think. Maybe. Anyways, yeah, I mean, it's kind of tricky around the tabard here. Again, on the black panels, you got to get in. Let's see if I can get a good angle. Roughly that. Now I can't see what I'm doing though. So, but if it's hard to see when you're painting it and it's right in your face, it's not likely that you're going to see it when it's sitting on a shelf or on a table. So, but there we go. Just get that top part of the belt. Did the same thing on the little bags here, and I put a little bit of a dot of Stormhost Silver on both those buttons. So basically now we are done with the light leather portions. If you got to clean up, I've been cleaning up with what is this one? Rhinox hide. Rhinox hide is a dark brown, so it almost looks, it's a little bit different than the Mournfang Brown with the Agrax Earthshade on it. However, it's close enough that, again, for a quick little touch up, it's not a bad improvisation or band-aid or thing. So, all right, moving on. My highlight for the Retributor Armor is going to be Auric Armour Gold. I've already done this half of the Aquila, which is why it kind of looks shinier and brighter. It looks a little washed out on camera, but you can still see the defined lines in person. But basically just going to go and with very, very light pressure hit all of the raised edges best I can. I will use my thumb as a palette and kind of knock off most of the paint here, because while I want a good amount of coverage, I don't want so much paint that it's able to dip into the recesses. If it does, I go back with a little bit of Retributor Armor again, and if it's still too bright, I will, you know, specifically line in some Reikland FLeshshade in those lines. But usually, if I have to do any cleanup, the Retributor Armor is enough. But this side's going okay, and it brightens up really quick, so you don't need to do a whole lot if you happen to be using this Auric Armour Gold. So we got this Aquila as well as the pommel, and that's all of it for the gold. So, yeah. Shiny. Next up, I'm going to be adding a little Dawnstone to the straps back here. You can go and paint them one at a time, really carefully, really lightly, just like that. If you have a pair of those magnifying glasses, this would be the time to use them, just because they do help out a lot. Trying to do it without wearing them right now, just because, I don't know why. The other way you can do this is, again, by knocking, kind of like we did with the Retributor Armor. Knock a little bit of that paint off, and just try and stay as parallel to the surface as you can, and just light pressure. You can see you get most of them done in one quick swoop. But if you got too much paint on it, it will fill in those little gaps and be annoying. Now I'm going to grab, since it's also a tiny little piece here, and not just because it's a miniature, the handle of the chainsword here. So I've got a little bit of the pink horror, and I'm going to come in and do the top lines to start. So like right at the very top of the raised section,
don't know if you can see that. That's how insignificant it is to highlight some of this stuff sometimes. But it looks great when it's all done. And if you do everything, well, then something that you didn't do stands out. So maybe get a little bit more. Make sure this part, you probably should have it thinned down pretty well. You may have to do a bunch of tiny little consecutive lines here. But anyways, so I'm doing just the top part of that. Now I'll do the top part of the next portion there. And just to add a little bit of, you can see it's the definition is starting to come in, whereas before it just looked like black. Now if you want, I'm going to do it on my thumb because I feel like it. Basically, like if this is the bottom and this is the top, we're highlighting this part up here right now. We can come back and highlight down at the very bottom, but then if you get too close, then it's just going to look like one giant mess of what do you call it, pink horror. In which case you take some Screamer pink and really lightly, again, kind of like we were doing with the belts, paint right back in the middle just to thin down those lines of the pink horror. So overall, like I said, it's not even super necessary because there's such a tiny, it's not like one of those handles where, you know, he's got his hand on top of the pommel and you can see the entire handle right there like that. This is like he's gripping most of it, so you can barely see it, and it's really not the focus of this model, especially because imagine you're taking a picture or something like that. It's going to be, you know, something like this, and you're going to see mostly, you know, the center of his chest and everything else. So there's a little tiny piece over here. But I mean, I painted the tabard from the inside where you can't see it at all, so who am I to talk? Moving on to the glove and boot highlight, you can see I've already done a little bit here, as well as on the higher portions of the gloves. The Gorthor Brown, and this will be an edge highlight to go on the edges, go figure, of the boots. So we got a line up here that goes all the way across. Try to highlight on the top of the ridge right about there, something like that. I'll obviously be coming back later and cleaning those guys up, or not cleaning these, but, you know, finishing them in general. But also looking at things like little ridges like this on the boot, you know, part where it might be folding up and over or being squished against the metal, something along those lines. And then trying to get in here later on, but let me move on to part of the glove because I want to show these lines here. There's a couple little lines and I can see them because the shade, it's not as if the shade settled in a certain spot, but the light is hitting the raised portions a little bit more than the non-raised portions, and that just kind of allows me to see where to make that that highlight. And then I'm going to come here as well and do an edge around the border, and these fingers are going to be difficult, but that's fine. For these, I just kind of run a little bit of a line on them just to point them out. You know, fingers are always doing their best to point, so, you know, give them a little respect, point them out sometimes. And so, anyways, be careful going around here. We're going to come back and highlight the silver later, but, you know, if you can. Now I'm going to be using some Runefang Steel or Stormhost Silver, I think they're the same color, to highlight the metallic areas such as the blades on the chainsword here. Just getting the very tips of them so they look nice and sharp and pointy. Thusly. Also going to be going back, I already did, but I'll show you where it is. Just little lines on the belt buckle, get the little clasp, the edge here. I did the rivets, which you can see on these panels. They're very tiny. Those, sometimes I'll just wait until the very end to do, but I just did them ahead of time. Circled around the top here, cleaned up in black, you know, did a little bit of here, around this breather on the back of his head. Basically anywhere you got a silver metallic, that's where we're going to be doing it. We're going to be doing some edge highlights as well on the bolter on the very sides, and just trying to be careful to not, you know, get too crazy with it. If you'd like at this point too, you get a really tiny amount of silver, and then maybe just go back and do a slight, let's see if we can get this little bit of an eyebrow here, just as a high, like a fine highlight over the gold pieces as well, make them look a little bit shinier. Maybe run a line on the edge of this one and the edge of this one, something like that. You don't want to make it too bright, and again, this is if you're just using my method of gold, but yeah, we're just going to go in there and do that. And yeah, so going to go through all of these silver pieces and give them a little bit of shine back into them. So as you can see, I have started putting on some Ulthuan Grey onto the shoulder pads, just a very thin layer to brighten up what was that Celestra Grey. If I hit some of these, the black of the icons that are on the shoulders, that's fine. We're going to clean those guys up later. And there might be a little bit of back and forth between the whites and the blacks, just depending on brush control. But overall, if you're going on and you're putting these on nice and thin, make sure it's not you're not getting any streaky lines and whatnot, and that you get a nice solid coat on these, because we're going to come back later on, or edge highlight later on with some white scar just on the edges. So for the most part, it just needs to be a nice solid panel of white. So our shoulder pads are nice and bright, and we are looking really good here. So let me go ahead and add a little bit of edge highlighting with white scar just on the very edges. Again, as I've said, I don't know how many times, countless times, just be careful. You know, you want to make sure you're not hitting anything that you've already painted, because then you got to clean that part up, and that's just, nobody likes cleaning stuff up, you know? Or at least I don't. So I'm going to be as careful as I can. I just noticed that I didn't paint the back of this, but we're going to pretend that I didn't notice that, because I don't want to go and do that now. I did paint underneath a little bit, but I mean, can you tell? Can you tell? Can you tell? No, you couldn't tell, could you? Okay. Anyways, I'm gonna do white scar here. I might do a little bit of that Ulthuan Grey underneath, just because it's still very dark Celestra Grey. So we shall see. So I went back and I added a little bit of Mephiston Red back on top of all of the parts that we had shaded down earlier, just to kind of bring them back up a little bit. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some Evil Sunz Scarlet on all of the edges of this red. Just going around and edge highlighting all of them where I can. And of course, as usual, cleaning up any mistakes, being as careful as possible. But yeah, we just want a nice little clean line on all of these edges. So if you can't get it using the side of the brush, just try and draw as straight of a line as you can. This is where, if you do that, you redo the layer of Mephiston Red. This is where it comes in handy, because if you do make that line, that itty bitty tiny line, which you can barely see on the camera there, if you do make that wibbly wobbly, too big, too small, you can go back with just the Mephiston Red and cover right over it. So it's not as if it's same thing with the armor panels, let's say. So just be careful though, that way you won't have to. And you'll save some time that way. And then you can go out and enjoy the sun or the rain or the snow. I don't know where you guys live. So now on to the tabard. I came back and I cleaned up the Agrax Earthshade with a little bit of Zandri Dust once again. And now we are going to be adding Ushabti Bone to the highest portions, well, mainly to pretty much everything of this tabard. Maybe leaving a little bit of Zandri Dust just, you know, underneath here where the Agrax Earthshade has settled. We're going to leave that there. We're going to put some Ushabti Bone on the rest, though, and then we are going to come back and highlight that. But the reason I wanted to clean up with Zandri Dust first is that I want to be able to maybe blend the Zandri Dust and the Ushabti Bone together where the two kind of meet up, which, like right here, I'm going to let that be a defined line, although we'll probably thin it out, make it a nice thin line. But doing that with the shade directly gets to be a little bit difficult. Leave that alone, let it dry, come down here. I'm gonna paint in between the two creases that are there, just for that portion right there, like that. Then we're going to come and clean up this portion that goes over his knee. But again, I'm only gonna go down to about there. This is a really high ridge, so that's going to be fully painted and then probably highlighted, well, definitely highlighted later with the brighter color. But again, we're going to kind of leave this line intact in place and just get the outer portions. Are you seeing that? Okay. All right. Obviously, with none of this being in shadow, I mean, we could leave a little bit of Zandri Dust there if we wanted to, but I'm not that worried about it. I'm just going to cover that whole thing up. I'm going to come back, do a secondary coat on all these guys, make sure we have a nice solid color. And of course, let's wash this brush, repoint it, and repoint it. Get the point back on there, get the edge. And same thing here, we're going to go at the very highest part of it, and I'm going to kind of leave all those spots that are lower. Ooh, be careful. Alright, now you see right there, see I was a little bit watered down. It came up against the black. That's why we haven't highlighted any of this black armor yet, because I can simply just go back and paint over it. And I've said that before, and probably before I'm done I'll have said it again. But anyways, so I'm gonna put on a couple nice solid coats of this Ushabti Bone on the raised portions, and then see what we can do as far as blending it together to make it not look like such a hard transition. And finally, to finish up the tabard, we're going to add some Screaming Soul on the highest lines, similar like this here. Maybe a little bit on the crease that's coming down this way, just like that. Don't need a whole lot of this. And then, of course, edge highlighting around the whole thing. Let me try to do a little bit on this side. Probably use too much paint, but because the black has not been highlighted yet, and it's just straight up Abaddon Black, I'm going to be able to go ahead and fix that if I need to. But that's not too bad. One other thing I might do here is get a very watered down, very translucent coat of the Screaming Skull. And I'm going to put that like right here in the very center, just on the raised portion. I don't want to make a line. I don't want to make a line that stands out. I just kind of want to like add a little bit of highlight. Same thing like right here, right above the knee. There's like a raised portion, so I'm just going to add a little bit right here. But again, I don't want it to be the main focus. I don't want it to be like an edge highlight. Just kind of want to add a little bit of. You're not going to be able to see it very well. Can I move it up here? Will you sit there? If I could figure out which way is right and left. So it's like his knee is pushing the cloth up, so it might be like stretched, it might be a little thinner in that point. So yeah, so something like this, where there's an actual crease. Maybe again over here. Again, like this. Just doing right down like that. Something like that. Sure. And then, like I said, if you want to do a thin down coat, or very watered down in areas like this where it's like it's a fold that pops up a little bit, so just adding a little bit in the very center of that fold. Same thing right here. And then if you got it, go back with a little bit of the Ushabti Bone, and in case it's too wide or too known, just get yourself a little bit of watered down Ushabti Bone and go and calm it down a bit, tell it to relax. So I'll probably go back and forth with that a bit. Like I think I put too much on that piece right there. See, someday I'll put like a tape box around here so I can actually see where I'm painting. I think I put a little bit too much here on this side, but once it dries, I will go back and check it out, and probably go back and forth just a little bit, just kind of like, this is almost like the same process as doing any sort of like glowing swords, where you want the transition to be smooth, so you do thinner, more layers and thinner each time, just so you get a nice smooth gradient. So let me finish that up, and then gosh, so close to being done. So for our final color to highlight. We're going to be highlighting Abaddon Black, all of the black. There's actually 2 separate black portions though. One is going to be the pants, and so we're just going to throw an edge highlight of, let's go, we can almost see there, edge highlight of Eshin Grey on all of the edges, as well as any of the folds that are in these pants, little creases that you can see. I already did this side, so you can kind of see, but it almost just looks like the reflection. But trust me, there is Eshin Grey in here. So there you go. For the other portion of the blacks, that is going to be a little bit of Dark Reaper, which is a blue, and we're going to go highlight. Essentially, you got, you know, all of these metal pieces that are around the boots. You know, we've got plenty of edge highlighting to do here, cleaning up with Abaddon Black as necessary. If you're gonna miss, try to miss onto the black portions, because you can clean those up a lot easier than you'd be able to clean anything else up, in my opinion. But a lot of times, you know, we're just throwing an edge highlight back like here, like so. It's just real quick line right across the top, just like that. Up here, boom, just like that, and right over here, just like that. So, you know, you can see it goes on pretty quickly. If you want to do a secondary highlight on the metal, you can go ahead and use a little bit of, I think it's Fenrisian Grey. That's a super bright blue, so I don't think I'm going to come back and do it. One, because these models, or at least these Neophytes, like, there's a bunch of them all together. This isn't like a character where you want every single detail as much as you possibly can, but to each their own. I mean, you could throw 4 layers of highlight on here and do a nice thick layer, or rather a thicker initial highlight, and then, you know, do a secondary highlight, and then do, you know, mix that secondary highlight with a little bit of white and get an even brighter one. So, I mean, it's all up to you, just, you know, however you want to do it. I'm not going to, because, I don't know, I'm happy with how this looks. This model really came into its own when I finally put the Ulthuan Grey on the shoulder pads. It started to pop out. So up here on this metal of the black, I can't remember if I did that. Where did my guy go? There he is. Oh gosh. So I painted this other Black Templar. This is an actual model, or it's an actual model. No, this is more of the actual. He's not a Neophyte. And I think I did this in grays as well. So you can see around the whole body, the armor is that blue in Dark Reaper, but I believe that I did these specific in gray, as well as like the handle here, I think is also in gray and not blue. So realistically, it's just the power armor that got the Dark Reaper. So anyways, let me finish up with that. So overall for the blacks, just to recap, because I know I kind of rambled there, right? I know. The pants is Eshin Grey, and then if you want to do a secondary highlight, Dawnstone. And then the armor is going to be Dark Reaper, Fenrisian Grey as a secondary highlight. And then, yeah, like I said, just maybe the this one, yeah, it's up to you. I'm going to leave it up to you. I'm going to do it in Eshin Grey and then some Dawnstone. And then I will go off, paint the base, show you what it looks like. And with that, we come to the end of another Roshem Joe Paints episode. If you made it this far, thank you. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something, and even if that something is to not wear a hat when you're trying to film down, and yeah, hopefully you got something out of it. I enjoyed painting this. He was a lot more fun than I thought he was going to. The flesh came out better, and definitely the addition of the eyelids make them look a lot less surprised. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. If you enjoyed what you saw, go ahead and like it, subscribe it, do all the normal YouTube-y type things, and we'll catch you on the next one. So long. Oh, stop recording. Yes.